But I think Steve's comments were the understatement of the year, abundant rain. I think that's a little understating the obvious there. But we needed it and love it. And I heard somebody, I was watching a live broadcast when the storms were coming through and watching the weather, and the weatherman was taking comments as he was doing it. And he said, he's in Texas or somewhere, and he said, I have a comment from, he pronounced it Lena, Illinois, but he said, I have a comment from Freeport and Lena, Illinois. Move that tornadoes away from us. So we did. We didn't get a lot of any damage or major damage. This morning, we're talking about faith. Hebrews chapter 11 is often known as the hall of faith. We have the hall of presidents in the Capitol, and we have the hall in the Pentagon of all the Medal of Honor winners. Well, Hebrews 11 is the hall of these people that God has said, you can look up to these people. This is your hero. And so in Hebrews 11:1, he said, now faith is the certainty of these things we hope for and the proof of the things that we haven't seen. Abel offered a better sacrifice. Enoch walked with God, and he was no more, for God took him, right? Noah preached for 100 years. Nobody came forward. But yet he built the ark in faith, having no clue what God expected him to build. Sarah conceived Isaac by faith because she was old. Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, showing faith that God's future was true. Jacob worshiped God while having to lean on a staff. Joseph spoke of the Exodus. Moses led the Israelites out, and that's always one of my favorite stories because he led them out, and they no more than crossed till they start saying, we ought to just go back. This is hard living over here. Don't think it's harder than slavery, but okay. And then we got Rahab. Rahab, an unbeliever, protected the spies, and God blessed her and put her in the line of our Savior because of her faith. Faith is a powerful, incredible thing. There are moments in our lives when God calls us to do something in which we don't fully understand what he wants us to do. We got no clue. I don't know what you want me to do. I don't know how you want me to do it. But faith comes even though you have no map, even though there are no guarantees that what you're thinking of doing is going to work. There may not be a visible outcome, not just in your life, but in generations to come. You just have a promise and a choice to make. Hebrews 11 says, you can do this. Look at these people. And especially when it talks about Abraham. And I didn't list him in that Hall of Faithful, but he's there because his life teaches us that faith is not to be a passive event. Faith is active. Faith says, you're going to walk on an unclear path because you believe in me that I will smooth the road out for you. You believe in me that I won't let you get lost on this path. I will help you. And so, no matter what the outcome in our life or the outcome in the moment looks like, and no matter what's going to happen, we still are going to follow God and worship God, even when the cost is great. If we were to summarize Abraham's faith in maybe one sentence, it would be this, that Abraham trusted God enough to obey him, although he had no clue what God was asking. So we're going to walk down a passage of faith today and see that there are three dimensions to faith that are still true and still speak to us today if we're ready to listen. So we'll have a reading first, and then we'll move on through.
By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household.
by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. By faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance. And he left, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he lived as a stranger in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, even Sarah herself received ability to conceive, even beyond the proper time of life, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, even from one man and one who was as good as dead at that, there were born descendants who were just as the stars of heaven in number, and as the innumerable grains of sand along the seashore. All these died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen and welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country which they left, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and the one who had received the promises was offering up his only son. It was he to whom it was said, "Through Isaac your descendants shall be named." He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he has also received him back as a type.
So many times we obey God without knowing what it was that God expects from us. If you think about things, and Gary's sitting there, was it your father, right, that did the stuff in Africa, that founded a school that has taught so many people to preach the gospel and to do other things for the Lord. I think of the founders of RCC 75 years later who had no clue that we'd still be on that property today, and of the hundreds, thousands of children. The founders of WCYC, the founders of our Christian colleges who did not know. I went to Lipscomb. David Lipscomb founded Lipscomb when it was nothing but a school to teach preachers to preach, and I think he had 5 students that first year. You know, so many people have stepped out saying, I'm not going to talk about Harding, Derek. I don't think anybody of any importance has ever gone to Harding. But anyway, including my wife. She knew what I was meaning. So, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive an inheritance. And he went out. He had no clue where he was going. Notice the order. God called him. He went. The understanding had to wait. God called him, and he went. If I'm to say nothing else to you today, God has called you at a very minimum to be his child. You don't know what tomorrow will bring, but let your faith sustain your walk. But he's called you to more than that, by the way. I promise you that. You are called in every phase of your life to more than sitting in a pew. So, he didn't understand, but he walked. Abraham left this place called Ur. It was a place of stability for him. It was a place of culture for him. And it was a place of security, but he left anyway. God did not say, okay, you're going to go from Ur to here, to here, to here, and you're going to have this tent here, and you're going to have this many animals in your... He just gave him a promise. I promise you, this will pay off. So he went. That's the essence of faith right there. Trusting the character. Character. I made the kids, they work hard for their Bible class because I made them define words. Even made them think through and define some Greek words that they had no clue what it meant until they worked it through. But too often, we forget the word character. Because God's character is the character that cannot lie, that cannot deceive you. When God promises something, it is guaranteed. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I have no clue. Health-wise, as I get older, whatever. I do know this, and it helps me live every day today, because the day I die, I go to see the Lord. Or technically whenever judgment is. But I will go see the Lord because he has guaranteed me that I have the right to come live with him. So the Lord says, we often say, Lord, show me what you want first. God says, follow me and I'll show you once you get walking. Once you start moving in that direction. Abraham walked away from everything that he knew, everything that was familiar to him. He just left it. Verse 9 says he lived in tents, temporary structures. So we assume from that verse he lived in a permanent structure before. It says Abraham knew not the world that would be his final home. Verse 10 goes on and says, he was looking forward to the city that has a foundation, whose designer and whose builder is God. He was not just moving geographically. He was moving and living spiritually in what he needed to do. He understood that God's ultimate promise was not particularly a land promise. It was much more than a land promise. It was much more than prosperity. God's ultimate promise was, you're going to help me build a kingdom that shall last forever. So faith means stepping forward when God speaks, even when you don't have the answers. Some of us are stuck, just stuck right where we are, because we're waiting for the voice of God to come over a loudspeaker or something. We're waiting for God to speak up and say, this is what you're going to do. But God is calling you to obedience. You can sit here today and believe that God never utters a word that's not in this. Okay, I'm fine with that. I don't believe it myself. I believe God still speaks today to us, not in contradiction or contravention of his word ever. But he still speaks. But even if not, God has already given us direction for what we're to do. He expects us to walk in obedience to his word, so you may not know where that obedience will lead you. But you do know you can trust the one who leads you. Faith is kind of like walking with a flashlight at night. You may not see the whole path, but you see enough to take the next step. At RCC, we have a problem. And that is that we got lots of tree stumps. I don't know who had the bright idea never to have these ground up and leveled out. But we either have a stump sticking up or a hole in the ground where it used to be. And I forget every single day to pick up my flashlight and take it with me, because when we get ready to have campfire, it's still light outside. I don't need it. When campfire's over, it's dark outside. And so I walk, trying to remember, where is that tree stump that's over by my tent? Yes, I have walked in the holes and over the tree stumps before. The flashlight would show me the way, but it doesn't show me everything. It would not show me my tent in the distance. It would only show me what's directly in front of me. Faith is like that. You may only see what's directly in front of you. Sarah was faithful to God even though she was nearly 100 years old. She still believed that God could overcome biology. The biology was the same then, by the way. They may have had children later in life than we do now, but they didn't have them at that age because the Bible is very clear. She was beyond that age. And so was Abraham. But they believed. So now, in Hebrews 11, it shifts from Abraham to his wife, Sarah. But the lesson's the same. Trust God. He said, I have a plan. Okay, Lord, let's see how this works out. Says she was barren, Abraham was old. Humanly speaking, a child was impossible. But they believed there was no turning back from that point, even if the condition of her body was not one to give her a child. What mattered was not her body. What mattered was her belief in God to do the impossible. Faith doesn't ignore reality. Reality is reality. Faith doesn't say I can walk through that wall, but God can knock it out of the way for me. I believe that. I also believe God's not going to let me make a stupid point, so I'm not going to walk into the wall. It refuses to let our perception of reality cloud our vision of obedience. So verse 12 goes on and emphasizes the miracle at hand. It says, for one man as good as dead. Don't you love that? For one man who could not came with descendants that were as numerous as the stars. That's what God does. God brings us life out of impossibility. Listen, you and I are not possibly able to get to heaven on our own. It is not. There is no way. There's no back door you can sneak through. There is one way. So we have to have the faith to obey God and work within his rules. But believe God when he says, I don't care what you were before. I only care what you are now. Verse 13 through 16 goes on and says, it tells us something profound, that many of these people died without ever getting the fullness that was promised them. One of my relatives, they moved into East Tennessee, up into the hills there, the foothills of the Appalachians, and they decided to build a church. And about 5 years ago, that church finally quit because all of its members were too old. Young people don't want to live in those hills anymore because there's nothing to do and crops won't grow. And so, but one person had the vision. He said, let's build a church here in the middle of this section of the hills. People will come. And people came for 125 years plus to that church. See, people that trust God's promises from afar, even though they don't see the fulfillment, see them in their mind. They see them from afar. They greet them. They embrace them as God brings them to them. They understood how they were strangers and exiles. We are too. But we trust God. So faith is not about how you start the walk. Sometimes it's about how you wait for the instructions. Some of us are in a waiting season right now. You've prayed. You've believed. But your promises seem delayed. Faith says God remains faithful even when we don't know how his faithfulness is supposed to work. So if you're in a waiting season right now, keep your eyes open, keep your ears listening, and keep looking at his word, and God will bring you to your purpose. If you're a young person, that might be get through school, and then you'll have the opportunity to do great things for the Lord. When I was young, I wanted to be a preacher. God said, you got to wait. You need a little world experience first. Then you can preach. Sometimes we're in our middle ages of life, and we think that, the opportunity to maybe go and be a missionary has passed me by. Or middle age is not your waiting period. That's when you can be the most effective. Even if you're here, I've said a million times, reach out and learn about our children here at this church so that you can encourage them, love them, guide them. She can't get embarrassed, but I'm going to do it anyway. LaKenda has always had a special gift, and that is to reach out to our children in the school. Not just here. When they're in school and they're in trouble, LaKenda will reach out to try and help them. When they're just walking the halls, she will reach out to touch them. She knows that's her gift, and she's doing it. She has no clue what will happen in the future with those children, but she's going to do her part today to guide them. And that can be yours. And if you're in your older stages of life, I used to say, you that are older, now it's getting to be where it's we that are older. We have a purpose too. Maybe it's to teach. You know what? There is no one in here too old to help teach a Bible class. There's no one in here too old to hug a child. Faith says God is still faithful even when he has not shown me the answer yet. So don't measure faithfulness by your timeline. Measure it by his character. Also, Abraham believed that God would raise Isaac from the dead if he sacrificed Isaac. Abraham was tested, and he went ahead and offered up his son. Young people, if you don't remember the story, I'm going to share it with you because it is one of the great Bible stories. Don't I say that every week about every story? I love them all. I do. I just love them all. So Abraham, God calls him and says, Abraham, I want you to take your son, your only son, up on the mountain. You're going to sacrifice. Abraham doesn't know what they're going to go do, but he takes his son, puts him on his donkey or whatever, grabs up a bunch of firewood. They go, or takes him up to the mountain, and they get there, and Isaac starts saying, Dad, we got the wood, we got the flint and steel, so we can start it. Where's the sacrifice? God will provide. See, Abraham's still waiting on God to do something. He doesn't want to do what he thinks God wants him to do. But Abraham goes ahead and ties up his son. I love the fact the Bible doesn't say anything about Isaac fighting his dad. He tied him up. He was a teenager. He could have fought. Ties him up, puts him on that altar. Abraham picks up the knife, and I can't even imagine. And y'all know how close Declan and I are to each other. I could not imagine taking that step under any circumstance. But Abraham picked up the knife, raised up the knife, and I know in his heart and his mind he was still saying, God, please do something else than this. But the fact that he was ready to do it, God said, stop. You took that final step. The fact that you were willing to was the step. Look, you may not be calling God to do things, but if you're willing, God will reward you. If you're willing and watching. So God, of course, took Isaac off the altar, and they look up, and there's a ram that's tangled himself up in the thorns. God did it. And they use that as their sacrifice. That was the climax of Abraham's journey. That was when faith became, when the rubber hit the road, as they used to say. God's giving him a promised son, and then God says, I want him back. Abraham believed that God would do something. That's not difficult. That's devastating. Isaac was not only Abraham's only son at that point. He was the fulfillment of God's plan and promise for the future. So, I turned my knife around. I can't find my clicker now. So Abraham obeyed. Verse 17 says he offered him up. But Jeff, you just said he didn't. He didn't kill him. Yes, he did. In his heart and in his mind, he gave him up to God. God just stopped that plan and changed directions for him. Isaac was the very one through whom the promise was supposed to come, and God made that happen. So how could Abraham do it? He could do it because faith releases fear. Faith takes away those things that stops us. When we love and trust God, he takes over. He said he considered God was able to raise him up from the dead if necessary. Abraham believed that God's power was greater than the power of death, greater than the problem that he was trying to figure out an answer to, greater than his age, greater than everything. He believed Isaac would fulfill the promise God had made, and that is mature faith. It trusts that God provides. God sustains when we surrender. God cares for us so much. Abraham didn't cling to the promise more than he trusted the one who gave the promise. That moment points us forward to another father who would not withhold his son, doesn't it? God. Where Abraham stopped, God did not. God allowed. Even when Jesus is a grown man. I said Isaac didn't fight. Jesus kind of sort of did when he was on Golgotha and said, please let this cup pass from me. Please. But Jesus took the step that Abraham took when he said, nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. If you remember, I told you before, and the word is still currently used today in Middle East. But remember, he did not call him Yahweh, Jehovah, any of God's formal name. He said Abba, Daddy. He used that very comfortable, very familiar phrase to say, Dad, please let this stop. Don't do this to me. But Jesus, in his mind the whole time, saying, but I'll do it. I don't want to. The human Jesus doesn't want to do this, but I will. So God didn't stop where Abraham did. God gave Jesus fully, sacrificially to cure your sin problem. That's what God did for you. Faith is proven not just in what you receive. Faith is proven when you're willing to give it over to God. Is there something God's asking you to surrender? Now think about it. Is there something in your life that God says, would you give that up for me? Maybe it's a sin problem. Maybe it's something you think you can't live without. Maybe it's somebody you don't think you would ever dare speak to them about the Lord. I don't know, a plan, a relationship, a dream you've got, maybe any of those. But God says, listen, your faith will say, God, I trust you enough to give you this thing, whatever it is. So be willing to do that. Abraham's life teaches us that faith is not a single moment. Faith is a lifetime journey. Faith walks when it does not know. Faith waits when it cannot see. Faith worships when it does not understand. And through it, faith is anchored in this truth that God remains faithful. No matter what's going on in our country or any other country in the world, God remains faithful. The same God who called Abraham then is calling you today. He calls all of us. He calls our families. You want more? God calls his church to stand up for him. In a world that is divided, in a world that hates, God says, stand up for me. I read an article this morning, not the whole article, I didn't have time, but I skimmed it. But it said that nationwide, more men are coming back to the Lord than ever before. That's a great precursor to what can happen. God's calling you to trust him. God's calling you to follow him. God's calling you to believe him, even when the path is unclear. So what, 10, 12 years ago now, the earthquake hit Port-au-Prince. Thousands died. And I asked you as a church, I said, I don't know what I'm going to be doing, but using my past experience, I'd like to go and help. I didn't even really have a contact then other than a friend of mine. You raised over $30,000 in 2 weeks and said, go. Stay as long as you need to. And I got there and I met a preacher named Luckner Pierre. Through Luckner, I met officials at the United Nations. Through them, we fed thousands and thousands of people. We sheltered them. We helped build their homes to replace them. We gave them clothing and medicine. I can never erase that vision in my mind of walking through the halls of the hospital, praying with people, even though they didn't understand a word I was saying at that point. I worked hard to learn their language, but in the beginning. But I would kneel down, hold their hand, and I just remember asking the question, what can we do for this one? And they said, let them die in peace. And they were just laying on the floors in the hallways of the hospital. They were laying outside in the courtyard, just and bodies stacked. Horrendous. But because you said, I've got the faith that we can just step out and try this. Let's see what. And for years we worked with Luckner. The only reason we're not today is it's just physically impossible to get into that country. So God's saying, trust me. God's saying, follow me. God's saying, believe me, even if you don't know what that next step's going to be, just do it. Even if my timing is delayed in your mind right now, just do it. Even though the cost may be higher than you think you can bear, just do it. So where are you today? I'm calling if you would like to come and are ready to ask God to forgive some point of your life, that's great. If you're asking God to, if you're ready to put him on in baptism and repentance and confession and faith, that's wonderful. But if nothing else, I want you to go home today and say out loud is the best way. But just say to God, what do you want me to do, Lord? What are you calling me? Step out in obedience and say, I am willing, Lord, to do what you need me to do. Maybe it's an addiction. I'm willing to stop it cold today. Are you waiting on a promise? Keep saying, I'm waiting, Lord. I'm here. I'm listening. Are you being asked to surrender something to God? Whatever your situation, the answer to every one of those questions was the same. Trust him. Just trust him. Someone was making fun of me and Allison just last week. I don't remember. But the fact that, I'd made the comment last Sunday that I hate telephones. I do. I was kind of teasing LaKenda, but I hate telephones. And I don't talk on them even to my own mom very much, 10 minutes a week maybe. I don't know how my sister talks to her for 2 hours a day. It's not against my mom. Why would anybody talk to anybody for 2 hours a day? But somebody was teasing, and we said, well, we don't have to talk on the phone all the time when one of us is away because we know each other. We talk about what we need to. We love each other. We miss each other. But we don't have to say it out loud because we know it. Faith is not about having all those answers. Faith is just about knowing the one who does. That's my God. My God is there for you today. My God is calling you. So let's be a people who walk by faith, not by sight, by faith. Let's wait. If waiting is what's required at the moment, let's wait with faith. And listen, let's worship in faith. I'm not saying we have to jump up and down anything. I'm saying put all of your heart into your worship. I can preach the worst sermon in the world, but if you put all your heart in worship, it will be a great day for you. The song leader, I'm not going to call any names. I'm not going to say anything about the one sitting up here. I'm not going to mention a guy that has a farm. No. Yeah, you're the only one. No. A song leader could just mess up the whole service, but your songs could be incredible if you put your heart into them. Nothing matters but your heart and your God. So turn your heart to God today as together we stand and as we sing.